She did not flinch when he said it. That was the part she would remember longest. Not the words themselves. Not the way his mother smiled into her teacup. Not the sound of the fire settling in the grate, as though nothing had happened. What she would remember was the stillness that came over her own hands. They had been resting on the table, on either side of her plate, and they did not move, not one finger, not even a tremor. He had said it the way a man mentions the weather, casually, between one bite and the next. Patience was never what anyone would call handsome. I think we can all admit that now. His mother laughed, soft and private, the way women laugh when they have been waiting a long time for someone else to say the thing they have been thinking. His sister reached for the bread. His father said nothing, which was the same as agreeing. Patience Alcott. Patience Wren, she supposed, since she had been Mrs. Wren for 14 months, looked at her husband across the length of the dinner table. Desmond Wren was 31 years old, with the kind of face that photographed well and meant nothing in person. He was already looking at his plate again. She picked up her fork. She took one more bite. She set the fork down, very gently, and folded her napkin. Then she stood, smoothed her skirt with both hands, and said, "Thank you for a lovely evening, Mrs. Wren." She did not say it to Desmond. She said it to his mother, who sat at the head of the table, because she had never relinquished that chair, not in 30 years, not even after her husband died, not even after her son brought home a wife. Patience met the older woman's eyes and held them for exactly long enough. Then she turned and walked to the stairs. No one called after her. She had come to Renhouse the previous October, in a hired coach that smelled of mildew and somebody else's anxiety. The house itself had looked better in the letter her father had written after his first meeting with Desmond's solicitor. Prosperous, he had called it. Well situated. What he had meant was that the Wren family owned a considerable portion of farmland in the county of Harland, and that their name was known, and that Patience, at 26, was no longer in a position to be selective. She had understood what that meant. She had always been practical. Desmond had met her at the door. He was courteous. He showed her to her room, which was at the end of the east corridor and received afternoon light. He introduced her to his mother, Mrs. Cecilia Wren, who looked at Patience the way a woman looks at a piece of furniture she did not choose and cannot return. "We keep early hours here," Mrs. Cecilia had said. "I trust that won't be a difficulty." Not at all, Patience had answered. She had been raised to be agreeable. She was agreeable. The wedding had been in November, a small ceremony at the parish church, attended by the Wren family and two of Patience's cousins, who had made the journey from Delmore. Her father had not come. He had sent a letter instead, explaining that the journey was too much for his health, which was true, and that he was proud of her, which she believed was also true, in the way that fathers are proud when daughters do what they are supposed to do. Desmond had not kissed her at the altar. He had shaken her hand. She had thought at the time that this might be shyness. She understood later that it was indifference. The first year of the marriage had the shape of a lesson she had not signed up to take. She learned the rhythms of the house. She learned that Mrs. Cecilia took her tea at 7, and her lunch at 12:30 and did not like to be disturbed between those hours. She learned that Desmond's sister Harriet, not the Harriet from the list, a different Harriet, Mrs. Harriet Fallow, who came to visit too often and stayed too long, had a habit of picking up objects in other people's homes, and holding them as though deciding whether they were worth keeping. She learned that no one in the Wren household asked how she was. Not once. Not in 14 months. There were things she did not learn until later. She did not learn, for example, that Mrs. Cecilia had written 3 letters to Desmond's solicitor in the first month of the marriage, suggesting that certain terms of the arrangement might be reconsidered. She did not learn that Desmond had read those letters and filed them away in his desk drawer, rather than responding to them. She did not learn that the farmland her father had transferred as part of the settlement, 63 acres in Patience's name, the land her grandfather had cleared, was now in a legal dispute because Desmond had attempted to add it to his family's holdings without her signature. She did not learn these things until a solicitor's letter arrived addressed to her, personally, 3 weeks after the dinner. But that comes later. What Patience did in the hours after she left the table was this. She went to her room, lit the lamp, and sat in the chair by the window for a long time without doing anything at all. She could hear the family below, the clink of silverware, a burst of laughter from Desmond's sister. The dinner had continued without her. She had expected that. She was not crying. She would be clear about that, for herself, in the accounting she made later. She was not hurt the way she might have been hurt in the first weeks, when she still believed that things could be different, that a marriage made without love could nevertheless become something livable, even kind. She had long since stopped believing that. What she felt, sitting in that chair, was something closer to clarity. She got up. She opened the wardrobe. She considered the dresses hanging there, the practical ones and the good ones. And she chose carefully, because she had always been careful. Because that was the thing about her that no one in this house had ever thought to notice. She did not pack everything that night. She took only what was hers before the marriage. The blue wool dress, the gray silk, the brooch her mother had left her, 3 books, and the small leather case her cousin Edith had given her as a wedding gift because Edith knew, even then, that Patience might someday need to leave in a hurry. She wrote 1 letter, sealed it, and left it on the desk. She slept, or tried to. At 4 in the morning, when the house was completely silent, she got up, dressed, picked up her case, and walked down the stairs. She paused at the bottom, not from hesitation, but because she wanted to remember the house clearly, the way it looked in the blue pre-dawn, the shadows on the wallpaper, the smell of cold ash from the fireplace. Then she went out the front door, which she did not bother to close quietly, and walked to the end of the lane, where the coach she had arranged 2 days prior was waiting. She had been planning this for 2 days. Perhaps longer than that, if she was honest. Perhaps she had been planning it since the 2nd week of November, when she had stood at the window of her new room and understood, with complete and unromantic certainty, that no one in this house would ever be glad she was here. The coach took her east, toward the town of Sutcliffe, where her father's cousin Agnes, a widow, independent-minded, owner of a small but thriving linen shop, had offered her a room in a letter that Patience had read and reread until the paper softened at the creases. Agnes Plum was 61 years old and had been married twice and widowed twice, and had opinions about both experiences. She met Patience at the door with a cup of tea already poured and asked no questions except one. "Are you well enough to sleep, or do you need to talk first?" "Sleep," Patience said. "Good," said Agnes. "We'll manage the rest in the morning." The room Agnes gave her was small and faced the garden, where there was a rosebush that had been cut back for the season and a wooden bench with a crack along one arm. In the morning, Patience sat on that bench for a long time. She listened to the town coming alive around her. Cartwheels on the cobblestones, the distant bell of the church, a child somewhere calling out a name she couldn't quite hear. She felt, for the first time in 14 months, that she could breathe. Agnes put her to work almost immediately, which was the kindest thing anyone had done for Patience in a long time. There was no pity in it. Agnes simply looked at her one morning over breakfast and said, "I need someone who can manage correspondence and keep the accounts. You strike me as someone who can do both." Patience could do both. She had managed her father's correspondence for 3 years before the marriage. She began that same week. The shop was not large, but it was well regarded. Agnes had built it over 20 years from a single loom, and an understanding that people would pay for quality if you gave them a reason to trust you. The accounts were meticulous, because Agnes was meticulous, and Patience fell into the rhythm of the work with something that surprised her by feeling like relief. She was good at it. Not good in the way people say to be encouraging, but actually good. She caught an error in a supplier's invoice the 2nd week that would have cost Agnes $43. And Agnes looked at the corrected figure and then looked at Patience and said, without inflection, "You should have been doing this for someone who deserved it." Patience did not answer, but she thought about it for several days. 6 weeks after she left Renhouse, the letter arrived. It was from a solicitor in Harland, not Desmond's, but her own, a man named Mr. Fenwick, whom she had not known she needed until Agnes had quietly arranged one. The letter explained, in careful legal language, that the 63 acres, registered in Patience's name, had been placed under a claim by Desmond Wren, and that this claim was without her authorization, and that she had, in the solicitor's considered opinion, significant grounds to contest it. She read the letter twice. Then she folded it and put it in the drawer of her writing table. That evening, she wrote back to Mr. Fenwick. She instructed him to proceed. She did not write to Desmond. Desmond came himself, 12 days later. Agnes saw him first. He appeared at the shop door in the morning, when Patience was in the back going over a fabric order, and Agnes walked to the back with unhurried steps and said, "There's a man outside who looks like someone's husband. Pale. Bad coat for the weather." Patience set down the order sheet. "Tell him I'm with a customer," she said. Agnes looked at her for a moment, then went back out front. Patience listened to the murmur of voices, then silence, then the sound of the shop door. A minute later, Agnes returned. "He says he'll wait," she said. "Let him," said Patience. He waited for an hour and a half. Patience worked steadily through the morning. She did not hurry. She did not check the front of the shop. She had decided. sometime in the 6 weeks since she'd left, that she was done arranging herself around Desmond Wren's convenience. When she finally came out to the front, he was still there, standing near the window. He had taken off his hat. He was holding it in both hands, which she had never seen him do before. Desmond Wren was not, in her experience, a man who held his hat like he didn't know what to do with it. She stopped at the counter and waited. He said, "Patience, not Mrs. Wren, not his wife, her name." She said, "Mr. Wren." That landed, she could see it. He had come expecting something, anger, or tears, or some version of the wife who had sat quietly at his table for 14 months and swallowed whatever she was served. He had not expected to be addressed like a stranger. "I want to explain," he said. "The solicitor's letter was clear," she said. "I don't require an explanation. I mean about that evening, at dinner." She looked at him. She gave him the same length of silence she had given his mother, across the dinner table before she walked away. Long enough to be deliberate, short enough to remain dignified. "I know what you said," she told him. "I was there." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a wagon passed. The sound of hooves on the cobblestones filled the space between them. "My mother," he started. "I am not interested in your mother's opinion of what she said or what you said or whose responsibility it was," Patience said. "I'm interested in the land. If your solicitor contacts Mr. Fenwick with a resolution before the end of the month, I'll consider the matter settled. Otherwise, I'll proceed with the claim and I'll proceed publicly." Desmond opened his mouth. "That's all, Mr. Wren," she said, and turned back to the counter. He didn't leave immediately. She could feel him standing there for another minute, maybe two. Then she heard the door. Agnes appeared from the back room almost immediately, moving with the deliberateness of someone who had definitely not been listening from behind the curtain. "Tea?" Agnes said. "Yes," said Patience. "Please." What Desmond did next surprised her. Not in the way things had surprised her in the early days of the marriage, with a small, painful hope, but simply as data, the way information surprises you when it is different from what you predicted. He wrote to Mr. Fenwick within the week. The land dispute was resolved within the month. The 63 acres were returned, cleanly, with documentation. And then, this was the part she had not expected, he wrote to her, not through the solicitor. A personal letter, in his own hand, which she recognized from the few notes he had left her during the marriage. Short, practical, impersonal. "The grocer will be here Tuesday. Mother's guest will need the east room." But this letter was different. She could tell before she finished the first paragraph, not because the handwriting was different, but because the pauses were different. She could see where he had stopped, where the ink was slightly heavier, where he had written something and then, she suspected, crossed it out and written it again. He did not say he was wrong, exactly. He was not a man who had been raised to say that. But he said, and she read the sentence 3 times, "I have thought often, in recent weeks, about what it must have been like to be a guest in your own home. I cannot claim that I made it otherwise." He said that his mother had been, and here he paused, she could feel the pause, not entirely well, for some time, in ways I had not wished to examine. He said that he did not expect her to return. He said that if she did not, he would not dispute it, and that her portion of the house accounts which he had managed would be forwarded to wherever she directed. He said, at the end, "I should have said something at that table. I know that. I did not, and I don't have an explanation for you. I only want you to know that I am aware of it." She read the letter through twice, and then set it in the drawer with Mr. Fenwick's correspondence. She was quiet that evening at dinner, and Agnes, who had been watching Patience the way people watch a weather system coming in from the west, did not ask. After dinner, they sat in the small front room with their respective books, and Agnes put a log on the fire, and for a while the only sound was the crackle of the wood and the turning of pages. Then Patience said, "He wrote to me." Agnes looked up. "He's not a cruel man," Patience said. "I want to be honest about that. He's not cruel, he's just absent, in the particular way that men are absent when no one has ever asked them to be otherwise." Agnes considered this. "That can be worse," she said finally. "Cruelty you can argue with." "Yes," Patience said. "That's exactly it." She did not write back for 3 weeks. When she did, the letter was brief. She told him she had received his correspondence. She told him the accounts arrangement was acceptable. She told him that she was well. And then, because she was a practical woman, and because she had learned, in the months at Agnes's shop, that precision cost nothing, she added 1 paragraph that she drafted 4 times before she was satisfied with it. She said that if he wished to understand what had been wrong with their marriage, she was willing to explain it once, clearly, and that this offer would not be repeated. She said that she was not doing this out of anger, but because she believed he was genuinely without comprehension. and that genuine incomprehension, unlike malice, could sometimes be corrected. She sealed the letter and gave it to Agnes to post before she could reconsider. Desmond came back to Sutcliffe in the spring. He did not come to the shop this time. He wrote first to ask if she would agree to a meeting, and she agreed, and they met at a tea room on the main street that Agnes had recommended, because the tables were well spaced, and the owner, Mrs. Holden, was discreet and had seen everything. He looked, she thought, somewhat worse than the last time. Not badly. He was still a well-made man, still the kind that read as capable on first impression, but there was something around his eyes that had not been there before. He had spoken, he said, with his mother. Patience waited. It had not gone well, he said. His mother had said things that he should have. He stopped. He started again. His mother had said things, and he had listened to them, and then he had said, for the first time in his life, that he did not agree. He was looking at his hands when he said this, not at her, which she appreciated. It had the feeling of honesty rather than performance. She left for 3 months, he said, to stay with Harriet. I don't know if she'll come back. What do you want? Patience asked. He looked up then. I don't know, he said. I know what I should want. I know that I've been thinking about the fact that I had no idea, before you left, that you were someone who could run a set of accounts better than my estate manager. I didn't know anything about you, and I was the one married to you. Yes, she said. You were. I'd like to know you, he said very quietly. If you're willing. I know I don't have the right to ask. She drank her tea. She looked out the window at the street, at the ordinary life of the town going about its business, the people who had no idea she was sitting here making one of the more consequential decisions of her life over a pot of Earl Grey. I'm not going back to Renhouse, she said. I know, he said. I'm not giving up the accounts at Agnes's shop. I wouldn't ask you to. And if your mother returns, Patience said, and if she is ever again in a room where she says something like that about me, I will leave. Without discussion. Do you understand? He said. Yes. Not of course, or naturally, or any of the smoothing words that men use when they are agreeing in order to get what they want. Just yes, plainly, like he meant it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then I'll consider it, she said, but I'm going home with Agnes. And if you want to see me again, you'll write first and you'll wait for an answer. He nodded. He reached briefly across the table, not to take her hand, but to set his own flat on the cloth beside it, close enough to be deliberate. She looked at his hand, then she looked at him. Write first, she said again. And she stood, and settled her coat, and left him sitting there with the bill. Outside the April air was cold and sharp, and smelled faintly of new earth. Patience walked back toward the shop, her footsteps even on the cobblestones, her case at her side. Agnes was at the counter when she came in, examining a shipment of linen with the focused expression she gave to fabric she suspected of being slightly off the stated weight. She looked up when Patience entered. Well, Agnes said. Patience hung up her coat. She went to the back room and put the kettle on. He's going to write, she said, from the other room. Agnes was quiet for a moment. Then, and you're going to read it? Patience considered the question while she waited for the water to heat. She thought about the 63 acres, now hers again, signed and settled. She thought about the letter with the heavy ink and the crossed-out words. She thought about the way Desmond had looked, in the tea room, when he said yes. Just that, just the word, no performance around it. She thought about the woman she had been when she arrived at Renhouse, agreeable and quiet and careful, arranging herself around the edges of rooms she was supposed to belong to. She thought about the woman who had walked out of that house at 4 in the morning and not looked back. I'll read it, she said. We'll see. She poured the water. She brought the tea. She sat across from Agnes in the back room of the shop, among the bolts of linen and the neat stacks of receipts, and the afternoon light came through the window at a low angle, and touched everything in the room with an even, unhurried gold. Outside the town went on around her, and for the first time in a long time, Patience Alcott, who she had also always been underneath, felt entirely, simply, like herself.